I am teacher Ashini Kosimachika, and for today, we will be discussing about the learner-centered teaching, foundations and characteristics. But before we embark to our discussions, I would like first to introduce my co-teachers and Study Hub 3.
Pose with the fans.
The introductions for our first topic, which is the learner-centered teaching, foundations and characteristics. So what are your expectations for our first topic? What are the learning outcomes that we can learn after these discussions? Or what are the things that you can learn and what are the knowledge you can gain after this discussion? So the learning outcomes is to differentiate learner-centered teaching from other teaching approaches. Example is the teacher-centered approach as applied in the various teaching areas. The second learning outcomes in this discussion is to discuss the need to shift from teacher-centered teaching to learner-centered teaching based on philosophical foundation, teaching, principle, and current research. And lastly, learning outcomes is to discuss the various roles of the teacher in learner-centered teaching and learning. This means that students are the center of everything that happens in school. Each student is different in how they grow and learn, and they are both logical thinkers and social individuals. To explain this further, think of a classroom with many students. Each student has their own way of learning and understanding things. Some students might be good at math, while others are better at reading. This is because every student is unique and has their own strategies, strengths, and weaknesses. The importance of students in the learning process and how such students is different in how they learn and grow. It emphasizes that teachers need to understand and support each student's individual needs to help them succeed in school. A. Learner-centered teaching is an approach to teaching that focuses on student learning rather than on what the teacher is doing. Simply said that learner-centered teaching is a way of teaching that focuses on the student and their learning, rather than just what the teacher is doing. So students are encouraged to take on a more active role in their education. They get to decide what they want to learn and how they want to learn it, which can make them more engaged and motivated. This approach also involves teaching students important skills and critical thinking, problem solving, and analyzing information. There are 5 characteristics of learner-centered teaching. Number 1. Learner-centered teaching engages students in the hard, messy world of learning. So in learning-centered teaching, the focus is on getting students actively involved in the learning process. This means that instead of just listening to lectures or reading textbooks, students are encouraged to participate, ask questions, and explore new ideas on their own. Second approach in learner-centered teaching. So number 2, learner-centered teaching includes explicit skills instruction. So when we say explicit skills instructions, refers to teaching specific skills directly and clearly to students. This means that the teacher provides step-by-step guidance and explanations on how to perform a particular skill. This approach helps students become more independent learners and build confidence in their abilities. So the number 3 is the learner-centered teaching encourages students to reflect on what they are learning and how they are learning it. So this approach focuses on the student needs, interests, and abilities rather than just the teacher's agenda. They might also be given opportunities to reflect on their learning process, such as what study methods work best for them or what topics they find most engaging. Number 4 approach is the learner-centered teaching motivates students by giving them some control over learning processes. So by giving them students some control over their learning, they are more likely to be motivated to learn because they have or they feel empowered and have a sense of ownership over their education. This can lead to increased interest, participation, and ultimately better learning outcomes. The last but not the least approach is the learner-centered teaching encourages collaboration. So when we say collaboration, it is the working together with others to achieve a common goal. So learner-centered teaching is a teaching approach that focuses on the needs and interests of the student. It emphasizes collaboration, which involves in working together on a project, discussions, or activities to enhance their learning experience. That's all for my part. I am Ashley Nicole Machika again, and I hope you learned something. Overall conclusions about the topic is the learner-centered teachings that encourage collaboration help students take ownership to their learning, develop critical thinking skills, and build strong relationship with their peers. That is all for my report. For now, let's move forward and let me introduce the next discussant, my co-teacher, Angel May Safarino.
So hello and good day class, it's nice to see you again. Did you have fun with your first discussion with Teacher Ash? Alright, I guess you had learned so many things. So for the next discussion, I'll be your teacher. I am Angel May M. Severino and you can call me Teacher May. I'll be discussing the paradigm shift, teacher-centered to learner-centered teaching. So class, are you ready for the new insights? Let's begin. The way we see things has a huge impact in our lives. The shift from teacher-centered to learner-centered teaching facilitates the adoption of new practice that is applicable at present. The teacher role from being a provider of information to being a facilitator of learning. The shift increases the engagement of students to remain engaged in the learning process. You also foster independence and allows individual differences and learning styles which conforms the learner's need. So let's talk about philosophical perspective. So under philosophical perspective, we have teacher-centered philosophies, which are the essentialism and perennialism. So what is essentialism? Essentialism is an American philosophy of education which began in the 1930s and 1940s and was introduced by William Bagley. The two origins of essentialism are from idealism and realism. It is often called as traditionalism or conservatism. It is an educational theory that believes that the purpose of schooling is to impart necessary knowledge, skills, and attitude to enable young people to function as fully developed human beings in the modern world. Essentialism basically teaches the basic subject or the core curriculum. So now let's talk about perennialism. It is the most conservative, traditional, or flexible philosophy. It is largely a product of Aristotelian rationalism and its subsequent treatment by Thomas Aquinas. It assumed that man's basic or essential characteristic is his ability to reason. Only through reason can man understand existence and how he is required to live. Perennialists believe that one should teach the things that they believe are of everlasting importance to all individuals everywhere. Educational philosophy suggesting the nature of including human nature is constant and schools should teach content and topics that have well stood the test of time, according to Tolio in 2008. So now let's move on to the learner-centered philosophy, which are the progressivism, humanism, and constructivism. The proponents of the philosophy are William Kilpatrick and John Dewey. Progressivism emphasizes the concept of progress, which asserts that human beings are capable of improving and perfecting their environment. Progressivists believe that people learn best from what they consider most relevant to them. Students learn best way when they pursue their own interests, satisfying their needs. In other words, learning by doing. Curriculum is built on the needs, experiences, abilities, and interests of students. So, the second philosophy under the learner-centered philosophies is humanism. is a student-centered philosophy that focuses on enhancing one's innate goodness, rejects the idea of group-oriented education, and upholds the idea of enhancing individual development. The philosophy also believes that students should be actively involved with their education on all levels, and students should be able to make choices about what they will be learned. The purpose of humanism is to create interest in all spheres of life, believes learning is viewed as a personal act to fulfill one's potential. Perennialist also believes that in the necessity of studying a person as a whole, particularly as they grow and develop over a lifespan. So the third is constructivism. So when we say constructivism, it refers to the idea that learners construct knowledge for themselves. Each learner individually and socially construct meaning as he or she learns. It suggests that learners should be active participants in learning activities, that learning should be guided rather than presented by teacher, and that interaction and discussion are critical components of the learning process. Learning happens when students combine new and old ideas. However, learning occurs if students are actively engaged. It's also a learning theory that equates learning with creating meaning from experiences. So in order for you to understand, I have here a supporting research that you can read. So first, we have a qualitative examination of connection between learner-centered teaching and post-significant learning experience. Second, we have the rule of teacher efficacy and characteristic on teaching effectiveness, performance, and use of learner-centered practice. So the third one, we have the impact of learner-centered teaching in student learning skills and strategies. So fourth, we have the student-centered learning in classroom, a strategy for increasing motivation and achievement. And lastly, the learner-centered classroom practices and assessment maximizing student motivation and learning achievements. So that's all for my discussion class. I hope you have learned something. See you in the next discussion.
Thank you so much, Teacher Angel Mesa Firino, for that wonderful and engageful learning discussion. So now, let's move forward for our next topic that will be discussed by Mr. Lance Dwayne Matt Galera.
Good day everyone, I am Lanslin Mates Galera and today I will tackle to you about the resistance to change. But before I proceed with my discussion, I'd like to ask you, what have you learned from the previous discussion? Okay, so now let's tackle about the resistance to change, managing the shift. It is human nature to counteract any changes, but change is inevitable. The reason why people resist to change is because it's not an easy transition and there is the fear of the unknown. Students resist learner-centered approaches for a variety of reasons. The four most common reasons students resist learner-centered approaches are: number one, learner-centered approaches are more work. These approaches are more work for faculty who now face complex instructional design issues, but the student resists because they quickly realize that this means much more work for them as well. Resistance that is based on the increased amount of work is resistance for the right reason from the teacher's perspective. 2. Learner-centered approaches are more threatening. Students also resist these approaches because they are afraid. The teacher has opened Pandora's box and let out all sorts of unknown and unfamiliar policies, practices, assignments, and expectations not regularly encountered in other classes. The fear becomes a major anxiety for students who face learning tasks without confidence in themselves as learners. In summary, some students' resistance says more about self-perceptions than it does about the approach. Number 3. Learner-centered approaches involves losses clause. 1994 points out that whenever you move from one level of understanding to to another, something is lost. We, as teachers, need to remember that growth creates a sense of loss in students, the loss of certainty that has sustained them and been a refuge in an increasingly complex and confusing world. These approaches take our students to new places where the responsibility and ownership for what does and does not happen is much more obviously theirs. Some student resistance is about loss and longing for the simpler way this used to be. They may be understand intellectually that the new approaches are good for them and foster their personal development, but the feeling of loss is an emotional one that sometimes manifests itself as resistance. And the last one is learner-centered approaches may be beyond students. If teachers are unfair to students and unethical or ask students to engage in ethically compromised behaviors, then we should hope that students would resist despite the past that they may do so at some personal risk. Most faculty teachers are not unethical or unfair with students, but the learner-centered techniques selected may ask few students to take approaches, complete work employing methods, or use particular structure that are beyond students' ability to handle. Now, let's move to faculty resistance. Students are not only ones who resist these approaches. Some colleagues and administrators will object as well. Their resistance will be just as disheartening. It might be professionally threatening too. As with students, it is important to analyze the basis of their resistance. On what grounds do they object? Then, consider how a faculty member committed a learner-centered approaches and anxious to implement them can deal with resistance at this level. Next is sources of faculty resistance. The objections that colleagues raise come primarily from two sources. They object because they find the approaches enormously threatening. Learner-centered approaches test a teacher's level of self-confidence. They deal with issues of power and authority. They take us away from an exclusive reliance on content expertise and move us into the new or unfamiliar domain of learning skills. They raise questions about common instructional practices. Some colleagues resist for much more objective reason. They are concerned about what these approaches do. Diminish the amount of content in course, let students set course policies, devote class time to developing learner skills and awareness, employ rules and requirements, and involve students in assessment activities. For many faculty, these are radical ideas and they are raised quiet, legitimate questions about them. This is why it is important for those using these approaches to understand something of the empirical, theoretical, and experiential basis on which they rest. And as with some kind of students' resistance, these are objections for the right reasons. There are questions we can answer, and they provide us opportunities to inform, educate, and move more faculty forward in their thinking about learning and the kind of teaching that promotes it. Now, let's move to the strategies in dealing with faculty resistance. First is, the student should take responsibility. Second is, often it is the faculty who does because we adapt our teaching to fit request needs of students through detailed notes, study guides. And now, let's move to the last one, which is the consequence of faculty taking responsibility for learning. Students must remain passive. Next is, students do not gain confidence in their ability to learn on their own, yet a common goal of higher education is for graduates to be self-directed learners who can continue to learn the rest of their lives. Faculty need to teach students how to act for learning. And that's all for my topic. I hope you have learned something from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Teacher Lance Duin Mat Galera, for that wonderful and engageful learning discussion. So now, let's move forward for our another topic that will be discussed by Mr. Riven J.C. Tumpong.
So, hi everyone, my name is Raymond J. Sinopong and I am the fourth presenter of Study Hub number 3. So, here are the 5 dimensions of learning center teaching according to Weimer 2012. So, for the first one, we have the function of content. So, build appreciation or value of content. So, if they value more about the students, so they appreciate more about the students, so that they will engage more about this learning. And develop discipline-specific learning methodologies, practice inquiry and critical thinking, learning to solve real problems, encourage students to engage and be meaning-making. So they are this type of students of holistic being, and they focus more about the future of the students to solve a real life problem. Next one is the role of instructor. So the role of instructor is to foster student learning, accommodate different learning styles, so that the students will learn effectively with the different styles that the instructor that will be using in this methods. So aligned objectives, teaching methods, and assessment. So after the teaching methods, the instructor will assess the students so that they will know if the students have a learning outcome at the end of their discussions or their learning strategies. So the next one is utilize multiple teaching techniques. So they will use the different methods in teaching so that the students will acquire knowledge in the fastest way, so that they will use their time wisely. The next one, they designed interactive activities. So it falls more on face-to-face teaching strategies, so that the students will more passive when it comes to learning. So motivate instructive learning. So not just to teach the students, but also the instructor will teach the students, motivate them, so that they will be more motivated in learning. Next is responsibility for learning. So students take responsibility for their own learning. So in this content, the students should more focus on themselves. It's not just the instructor will instruct them, but also they will use their skills as well as the students. Next is the faculty teach students how to take responsibility for learning. Faculty teach students how to take responsibility for learning, and the next one, we have the specific skills can be taught, practice, and mastered. So each students have their own expertise when it comes to learning. So they have specific skills that can be taught. So we will practice and master. So each students will choose what skills that they should master. So that's all for my report, and that's all.
Thank you so much, Teacher Riven J.C. Tumpong, for that amazing and knowledgeable discussion. And now, let's move forward for the last but not the least discussant will be Mr. Jude Reynal Benitez.
Hello everyone, I am Jude Reynal B. Benitez, and let's continue the discussion. Fourth, we have the purpose and the process of assessment. Assessment is integrated within the learning process. Instructors give formative feedback for the purpose of fostering improvement. Students have multiple opportunities to assess themselves and their peers. Students can learn from their mistakes and demonstrate mastery. Instructors encourage students to justify their answers when they do not agree with those of instructor. Instructor and students mutually agree on a time frame for feedback and always follow the time frame for providing feedback. instructor uses authentic assessment throughout the course. Fifth, we have the balance of power. It is a learner-centered approach that empowers students to take responsibility and to share in some of the decisions about their courses. Students can have some say over some policies, deadlines, allow students some grading options. Once students begin to gain some control over the course, they will engage more in the course and will learn more. And that will be all, and I hope you learned something from it. Thank you!
Thank you so much, Teacher Giudrina Benitas, for that amazing and knowledgeable discussion. So the overall conclusion for the Module 1, which is the Learner-Centered Teaching, Foundations and Characteristics. So the Learner-Centered Teaching is an approach to teaching that focuses on the needs and interests of the student. It involves creating a learning environment where students are actively engaged in the learning process and where their individual learning styles and preferences are taken into consideration. Characteristics of learner-centered teaching include creating a supportive and inclusive learning environment, providing opportunities for students to collaborate and work together, and giving students choices and autonomy in their learning. Overall, learner-centered teaching is about shifting the focus from the teacher to the student and creating a learning environment that is engaging, relevant, and meaningful to the student. By using this approach, students are more likely to be motivated, interested, and successful in their learning. That is all for our discussion for Module 1, Learner-Centered Teaching, Foundation, and Characteristics.